Great, thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone here today. Welcome to our virtual State of Hospitality. I'm Suzette Mahoney, most recently a partner at R2L Restaurant and the president of CCPA. CCPA is an intimate and diverse group of business owners, executives, and managers looking to build relationships and offer each other meaningful resources. At CCPA, we take pride in bringing you unparalleled access to speakers, decision makers, and leaders who are shaping Center City. We keep our members informed about business challenges and opportunities in Philadelphia and help them become Center City smart. When COVID-19 first began, it took us a while to fully understand the impact it would have on our city. Initially, most thought we would close the office for a while and work from home for a few weeks. But restaurants remained closed and hotels could not operate due to the lack of business and personal travel and the inability of people to gather in large groups. The impact on events and conventions has been more significant than any of us could have imagined. And the industry that has been hit the hardest and the effects of which have been the most devastating to our city is hospitality and tourism. As we figure out how to help Philadelphia's business community overcome the challenges that lie ahead, we have been assuring our members and guests that we are going to be by your side every step of the way. We can't do that without addressing the devastating impact that canceled conventions and lack of travel and tourism will have on our people, our businesses, and our city. So we are here today to better understand where we are now and what the future may hold. Before we get started, I want to mention a few upcoming events. The next event in the State of Hospitality series is Marketing Philadelphia in October. Next week, please join us for Lunch with City Leaders with the City Controller, Rebecca Reinhardt. And our next Women Changing the City is on October 14th. You can find a full schedule of our events on centercityproprietors.org. So let's review a few details about today's events. We are recording this so we can share it afterwards. Please use the chat feature to ask questions, comment, or make any suggestions and to connect with each other. We will mute everyone to maintain audio and visual controls and may invite you to unmute at certain times. As a reminder, you are live on video, so if you need to take care of business, feel free to turn off your video. I'd like to thank CCPA's sustaining sponsor and preferred benefits provider, Michael Craig of Penworth Financial Services. And we are delighted to announce that this series is now sponsored by Temple University School of Sport, Tourism, and Hospitality Management. I would like to introduce Associate Dean Jeremy Jordan to say a few words.
Thanks, Suzette. Good morning, everyone from Temple University. I want to share our greetings to this group, and we look forward to being able to meet in person in the near future, hopefully. Established in 1998, the School of Sport, Tourism, and Hospitality Management at Temple University has a distinguished tradition preparing leaders in the sport, tourism, and hospitality industries. The school's innovative approach to learning combined with the location in the heart of Philadelphia fosters transformational educational experiences. We're thoroughly committed to providing student-centered education and professional development relevant to today's thriving sport, tourism, and hospitality industry. STHM integrates applicable real-world experience into the curriculum and classroom through its global network of industry partners and well-connected alumni network. While the hospitality industry has been devastated, we stand ready to educate the new hospitality workforce and look forward to growing the industry in Philadelphia. This series is important to highlight the impact of the pandemic, and we are proud at the School of Sport, Tourism, and Hospitality Management to support the events and work with many of you. So thanks for letting us be a part.
Thank you, Jeremy. Today we are delighted to have co-moderators. Dr. Brandy Baldwin is the CEO at Millennial Ventures Holdings, the parent company to a growing portfolio of women and minority-owned businesses. Prior to her role at Millennial Ventures, she spent over 6 years as a business and psychology professor at institutions such as Temple University, Harcum College, and Johns Hopkins. After publishing her first book on corporate leadership, Dr. Brandy has become a thought leader who is tapped by organizations like Discover, Comcast, and the federal government to share her unconventional insights on engaging the millennial workforce, leadership, and diversity. She was appointed to Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney's Millennial Advisory Commission in 2017 and was recently named one of Philadelphia's most influential African Americans by the Philadelphia Tribune. Our next moderator, Greg DeShields, is a friend, colleague, and fellow CCPA board member. Greg currently serves as the executive director at PHL Diversity, a business development division of the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. Greg is responsible for developing and implementing plans, strategies, and initiatives specifically designed to raise Philadelphia's image as a diverse, multicultural destination, leading to hotel room nights and economic impact for the region. Greg is a graduate of Johnson & Wales University, Providence, Rhode Island, with a degree in hotel and restaurant management and hospitality management. His professional development includes certification from the Institute for Diversity, Urban League of Philadelphia, Leadership Forum, Leadership Philadelphia, and the Greater Philadelphia Leadership Exchange. The full biographies of today's participants are in the program. Please join me in waving a warm welcome to our panel.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Suzette, for that incredible introduction. And I am thrilled to share the stage with Dr. Brandy. I also want to acknowledge and thank Ben and Megan at CCPA for the incredible work that you do. And a special shout out to Maria over at the Pennsylvania Convention Center for all her hard work in terms of helping us produce today's program. I should start out by saying that as a board member of CCPA, the ability to bring the voice of the hospitality community to the business community has been a top priority. And when Ben and I originally discussed the idea of doing a program that really talked about the state of hospitality, we realized that one session just could not do this. We agreed quickly that we would look at some of the key aspects of our hospitality community here in Philadelphia and allow adequate time for the story to be told about truly the state of the industry. So we launched the conversation exclusively with restaurants, which was a very deep dive conversation that I think revealed a lot of important information for those who attended regarding the state of that particular industry and how it continues to evolve. We did a quick follow-up and spoke about the hotel industry. And it was extremely revealing to learn a lot of the details and nuances around the hotel industry and how, once again, one session dedicated to that conversation certainly would give us the insights necessary as we go forward. And today's discussion around meetings and conventions, and specifically looking at the Pennsylvania Convention Center, is without any doubt, I think, the most exciting aspect of this conversation that needs to take place. Given the economic impact and the significance that the center has, it was really important to be able to draw a conversation like we have today. I do want to start off with a statement just to kind of give you some clarity about the industry. So the travel industry, which helped employ 1 in 10 Americans last year, has been hit hardest and devastated as a result of the economic fallout from the pandemic. Having lost over half of its jobs, the industry across the country, and of course here in Philadelphia, has just had significant fallout in terms of the promise and the capability that we were well on the track for in 2019 and 2020. But Philadelphia is an unstoppable city, as you've seen in a number of the backdrops of those who are speaking today. Philadelphia is well on its road to recovery. Thrilled to say that a number of our suspended hotels have opened their doors. And given the momentum that we've had in a number of years and the collaborative spirit that we've had throughout the number of years in rebuilding our hospitality community, we are poised for even a greater and a brighter future. And who better to bring us through that conversation today than John McNichol. And John is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Convention Center, and we'll follow up with Kelvin Moore, who is the regional general manager over at ASM Global. So we'll break up the conversation into 3 different buckets like we did in previous sessions. The first is really the business of the convention center, to give you a sense of that as a business entity and how it functions. And then round 2, we'll turn it over to Dr. Brandy to really talk about the impact of the pandemic and what it has done in terms of the operation of the center. And then of course, to look to the future. So as a beginning, I thought I would really provide a few quick questions to John to begin the conversation, and we'll dive a little bit deeper. So, John, thank you so much for joining us. I see you with about 1 million people behind you.
Right. That's all our hospitality crowd from a couple of years ago on Broad Street. It's a fine moment to remember.
I actually think I'm on your shoulder. If I'm looking there, I think I see my forehead or something. That was a great day. So I want to hit you with a couple of real quick questions, just to kind of give us the landscape. So whose idea was it to develop a convention center?
Success has 1,000 fathers, right? If we all agree that it was a worthwhile investment, then we have to go back to a lot of iconic leadership in Philadelphia. We had super engaged political and business interests, and it came together in a really magical way, because there are transformational times in the city's history when everybody comes together. The labor unions came together, the building trades came together with the Chamber of Commerce. We had people in great leadership positions like former Mayor and Governor Ed Rendell. We had Dwight Evans, then a state house member, now our U.S. congressman from one of the city districts. Those are the types of people who all began a conversation. Everyone checked their guns at the door and realized that Philadelphia had been suffering from a lack of employment in certain areas like manufacturing and the industrial sort of demise of the city as we knew it years ago. This all happened in the 80s, in the early and mid 80s, these conversations started. And the idea of creating a new industry, honestly, was very challenging. And the idea that hospitality could provide that, given the historical nature and the beautiful city that we all enjoy and its location, it just became a no-brainer. But there was a lot of people involved, way too many to mention, but a lot of people that names that you all know. John Street was involved. Jim Corrado, who now runs our Independence Visitor Center, was one of the early architects of the structure of the convention center concept. So I know these are fast questions, so I won't go too long, other than to say that there are a lot of people who can take personal pride and have some a portion of ownership for the concept, which of course today has come to fruition.
So as a quick follow-up, when did the Pennsylvania Convention Center open? And I know there's maybe 2 dates because of the expansion, but what were those dates?
So we opened in '93 is when we opened our doors, and it coincided with the first Welcome America. So that was in June of 1993. And then, of course, we expanded it in 2011. Those were the key opening dates for the building you see now in Center City.
Great. So how is the Pennsylvania Convention Center funded?
We have basically 2 buckets. One is our portion of hotel tax revenues, which we receive. They go to the city first, and then they go to a trustee, and then it comes back to us. That's the major source of funding that we have, and that funding covers our operating deficit every year. It covers our capital that we need to reinvest in the asset and maintain the facility, and it also covers our debt service. So hotel tax revenue is a major portion. The other portion of revenue that we receive, of course, is from customers. It's for, rental income and food and beverage and AV and the like, all the other ancillary operating elements that we have at the convention center. So those are the 2 major buckets of funding.
Got it. And realizing the significant contribution that the center makes in terms of the economic vibrancy of the city of Philadelphia, just in general, how much does the Pennsylvania Convention Center cost?
How much does it cost? This is almost an unanswerable question, because I'd have to go a very long way to get there, but I will tell you this. Convention centers don't make money. Right? Our operating deficit this year and last year are about the same, which is something of a miracle given the pandemic. But we usually lose somewhere between $18 to $20 million a year in operating. And you would say, well, that's no way to run a railroad, and it's not. But every convention center around the country is in the same situation. We weren't built as profit centers per se. What we were built to do is to provide that impetus, that catalyst for economic activity. We talk about it as an economic engine for the region. And so when you net out the economic impact associated with the business that we attract at the convention center, and how that business then drives business in the hotels and the restaurants and the bars and the museums, nightclubs, and all the other activities around the city, that accrues to be somewhere normally in the range of about $600 to $700 million a year in economic impact. So if you take that $22 million operating deficit, which is covered by the hotel tax revenue, so we end up flattening out, we're ending up putting a significant amount of money into the economy, not into our pockets, but it goes into the pockets of desk clerks and waitresses and bartenders and taxi drivers and hotel personnel. So that's why these places work.
Great. And John, I have to thank you. I know they weren't easy questions to put into a concise answer, but you did a fantastic job. So, all right, so what is the Pennsylvania Convention Center really? Is it a state or is it a city? Like, what exactly is it?
So in 2011, when we expanded the center, we went from 13th Street all the way to Broad Street, and that was a $789 million expansion. It was the largest public works project, single project in the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The pre-existing portion of the building was $522 million. So all in, it was a $1.3 billion investment in the city of Philadelphia. When we did the 2011 expansion, which is when it actually opened, the expansion, it was really a remarkable time in the city of Philadelphia. But what also happened at the same time was the Commonwealth took over. They defeased all of the city's bonds that the city had previously held against the property, and it then became a Commonwealth asset. So our landlord is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So it is the Pennsylvania Convention Center. It's often referred to as the Philadelphia Convention Center. Obviously, that harkens back to the old days of the Civic Center in West Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Convention Hall. But it is the Pennsylvania Convention Center located in the heart of the city of Philadelphia. And we identify with the city, of course, because we are wrapped in the city, and that's why customers come to our convention centers, because the vibrancy of the city of Philadelphia. So we don't get offended when people call it the Philadelphia Convention Center. In fact, we take great pride in where we're located. But it is an instrumentality of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Great. Thanks for giving us that sense of the business of the center. So, Dr. Brandy, let's turn it over to you and Kelvin to talk more about the impact around the pandemic.
Absolutely. I think, honestly, the question that I personally actually do want to know is, how has the global pandemic affected the meeting and events industry, the center, and our local hospitality industry from your perspective, Kelvin?
Sure. First, good morning, everybody. Dr. Brandy, Suzette, Greg, Ben, thank you guys for inviting us to speak this morning. I often have the unenviable task of following John McNichol on stages across the city, and he's a hard act to follow. But I'm going to break it up before I get into the answer to the question. Many of you know I am a native Texan, born and bred, which means I was born with the birth defect of being a Dallas Cowboys fan. I have, for the last 2 weeks, have as my backdrop the Dallas Cowboys backdrop. I had a couple of meetings with our legal counsel this past week, Shammy Jones, and she gave me wise advice to not share that backdrop on this call today. So I accepted that advice. Thank you, Shammy, for keeping me safe. So that's the fun stuff, right? Now, the less than fun stuff in answering the question. Recent national forecast by the United States Travel Association estimates a $505 billion, with the B, $505 billion loss for the travel industry. And that correlates to about an $81 million loss in federal, state, and local city taxes generated from this industry. That's significant. Ranges for recovery 3, 4, 5 years. The USTA suggests that the travel industry won't fully rebound until around 2024. From a convention center management perspective, and as was said earlier, I work for ASM Global. We are an international public assembly facility management firm. We run 300 plus facilities around the world. And so we've seen impacts at many of our major markets. Broadly speaking, all major events for the remainder of 2020 have been canceled. They're wiped out. Many of those, where possible, have looked to move their events into the first quarter of calendar 2021. As this pandemic has progressed, we are now seeing many of those events who are in that first quarter of 21 looking to try to move further in the year. So the impact of the pandemic has been significant to the overall travel industry, to the convention center industry, and the ecosystem that surrounds convention centers. That it continues to be a very impactful thing. As facility manager in my partner facilities around the country, the landscape has kind of been shifting. When this pandemic first began to happen, it was kind of okay, what the heck is this? What's going on? Lots of confusion about what it was, what it meant. Is this going to be a short-term thing? The reality of it being a longer-term issue set in fairly quickly. And the focus went from, how do we manage these next couple of weeks to how do we mitigate the impacts of this very unknown new situation. Rescheduling events rather than having pure cancellations to try to save the business for the destinations, as an example. So we went to mitigation mode. As it became clearer that the pandemic really had no specific end date that we could put our fingers to, we had to mitigate it in a very much more surgical manner. Layoffs, furloughs across the industry, significant impacts. I think Greg talked earlier about over 50% of hospitality jobs were lost. And to where we are right now, across the industry, convention centers and arenas and all public assembly facilities are now looking to try to determine and project what is not the new normal going to be, what is the next normal going to be. And in doing so with our convention center partners, our meeting planners, we're trying to gauge what they see and what they're looking for, and making sure that as an industry, as convention centers across the country, that we are able to meet those needs in that next normal. I won't talk a little bit more about the local impact. I know John's going to talk about that, but broadly speaking, as a broad industry, the impact has been significant and painful. We do see a light at the end of the tunnel. I do not believe it's a train. It's an opportunity to come back bigger, better, stronger, perhaps differently. So that's kind of where we are right now from a global perspective. I know John's going to talk a little bit more about the global perspective.
Sure, John, did you want to add anything to that, just from more of a local perspective?
I'm going to pass over the Dallas Cowboy issue because I don't think anybody really wants to go there. I guess, Dr. Brandy, the thing that we all think about here is we only have about 125 employees at our high water mark working in the convention center. You may think it's a lot more. We're very well served by our skilled union labor partners that come in and out to build these big shows, and we'll have thousands of men and women who will roll in from the electricians and the stagehands and the laborers and the riggers from time to time. And that's what makes us really wonderfully successful. But the burden that we all feel very personally around this issue is the fact that we take very seriously our responsibility to be that economic engine, because we hold ourselves responsible for a high level of performance to make sure that the 92,000 men and women who work in hospitality in this area, in this region, in this great city, have food on the table. And so the local impact has to be measured first under the human element. And I think that sometimes we're just talking about dollars and cents, and we start to lose sight of the fact that, we've got tens of thousands of people out of work right now. Some of them are on unemployment. Some of them have moved to other jobs. The hospitality industry, unlike any other industry I've ever been involved in, is so welcoming as an entry-level position, and then presents almost immediately for individuals a ladder to achieve. And it gives them the opportunity for upward mobility within, whether it's a hotel or a restaurant, even in retail. And so many of the proprietors represented on this call today are, I hope, shaking their heads in acknowledgement that we really truly have the ability to drive careers and jobs and lifestyle. So we worry about the kitchen table a lot here, because we know that there's a very heavy responsibility that we carry in that regard. So when we lose 102 events to date, and we're rebooking pretty well, I give the CVB a lot of credit for rebooking a lot of those customers into future dates. I give our local sales team credit for rebooking some of our short-term business. It's just really hard, and that uncertainty, manifests itself in balance sheets, sure. And we look at that, and we're talking to the Commonwealth constantly and the budget secretary about how are we going to make ends meet for the future, and what's our capital budget going to look like. Those are all important conversations, but we are driven more so by the sort of the human factor here. How do we get these people back to work, and will they be available for us when it comes back? We have wonderful people in this industry, and I'm so proud every day to wake up and serve them. And that's sort of the local impact in a nutshell to me. We could talk about all the economics until we're blue in the face. I think everyone kind of gets it because they're experiencing it in their own businesses. So we're not unlike that, although I do sometimes feel like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, in this 1 million square foot building all by myself a lot of times, with only my senior staff and the other staff sort of rolling through safely and occasionally. But that's really the local impact that we see and are most concerned about.
Sure. This is a fun fact. I'm not sure, Greg DeShields, if I ever told you this. I used to work at the Spirit of Philadelphia for a good little while. Over 15 years ago, yep, cocktail waitress, got some good tips, and I had to participate in the dancing. Very embarrassing, but we didn't have smartphones back then, the way that we do now. Awesome. So, Kelvin, let's talk a little bit about, the center's response to the pandemic. Given our circumstances right now, the impact that COVID-19 has had on the economy, what steps, has the center taken to prepare for the eventual reopening of the meeting and events industry?
Yeah. And Ben, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pull up those slides for me, so sort of to illustrate some of the talking points here. So the approach we've taken here in the convention center is to, glass half full. We are, for all intents and purposes, not hosting any substantive events, but we're taking that time to reinvest some of the capital dollars that were planned for certain projects, redirecting those dollars to projects that will allow us to reopen in this next normal. So in coordination with that, we've developed a reopening plan that sort of helps us prepare to be ready for customers when the customers are ready to come back. So Ben, I'm gonna ask you to hit the next slide for me. So part of what we're doing here is a 6-pronged plan. And it is fundamentally based and supported by ASM Global's Venue Shield reopening and reactivation plan. It touches on 6 core areas, the most important being environmental hygiene. There's an area that speaks to food service, the customer's journey, which will be different when they come back to our buildings, workforce and training and reentry into the next normal, technology and equipment that will be required to operate facilities when reopening, and then how to communicate those items to our staff. Next slide. And I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. There's a lot of information, a lot of detail here. I'll suggest to you that the plan we developed for the Pennsylvania Convention Center, the primary document is about 70 pages long. When you add all of the ancillary, updated standard operating procedures and enhanced cleaning protocols, we're about 300 pages worth of information. And I don't want to go into a lot of that detail, but I did want to share just some of the information and things that we are doing and have done in preparation for our reopening. The environmental hygiene program, again, it's broken up into 2 parts. It is a deep clean of the facility, removing organic materials. John, I believe, has or will touch on some of the capital projects, utilization of EPA-approved disinfecting materials and things of that nature. Everything that we are doing is in accordance with CDC guidelines and WHO guidelines as well. Next slide. So once we get through that deep clean, from an operational standpoint, it is keeping it at a level of environmental hygiene expectations on a daily basis. That is our Keep It Clean program. We have developed over 200 standing operating procedures, everything from cleaning of doorknobs, running of the air filtration systems, PPE, all those items that are involved in this. Also part of that environmental hygiene program is our seeking the Global Biorisk Advisory Council STAR accreditation, which is sort of the gold standard for public assembly facilities across the country, and sort of getting that stamp of approval that the programs you've enacted in your facility are of the highest quality level. Next slide. On the food service side, our partner here at the Convention Center at Aramark, they have a very similar and stringent plan on the food service side. Their EverSafe program, it touches all aspects of the food industry. One of the primary items is converting to a completely contactless point of sale operation, physical distancing, new menus that will reflect the ability to sort of keep people safe and close but distance. No self-service buffets, no loose cutlery, things of that nature. Individual bottle and canned beverages and things like that. Next slide. Customer journey. Everybody is aware of the requirements for social distancing. In our industry, we've attempted to rephrase that to physical distancing. We are in a social business. We are in the business of bringing people together. So our terminology for that is physical distancing. But when you get back into the facility, things will look and feel different. We will have signage and guides to keep traffic flow a certain way. All of our room sets will be physically distanced. When you enter an exhibit hall, there will be certain protocols and checks and traffic flow items set up. So we've developed a very robust customer journey operation as well. Next slide. Again, this is more of that information looking at the public circulation and how people will move in and around the facility, in and out of restrooms, the elevators and escalators. Again, trying to keep that as contactless as possible. Next slide. This is an example of one of our standard meeting rooms. With the current physical distancing requirement of being 6 feet apart, where a room would have had a capacity of 320 people, that's down to 44. So the capacity in our facilities is reduced with today's guidelines. One of the things that I always stress when I give this presentation is that our reactivation plan is designed with the flexibility, intentional flexibility to be able to ramp up, down, to increase capacity, to modify what we're doing as guidelines and mandates require. So this is based on the current physical distancing guidelines. We certainly hope to be able to increase those capacities over time. Next slide. Again, another visual illustration of an exhibit hall, entry, exit patterns. Next slide. So John talked earlier about our most important and critical asset, which is our people. Our administrative staff, our labor workforce, our frontline folks, all very good, talented, dedicated folks. We have the obligation that we take very seriously that when we are able and ready to open up, that we reintroduce those folks back into the workplace in a very thoughtful, deliberate, and safe manner. We developed a return to the workforce program that speaks to that is considerate of every individual's comfort level when that time comes. It is a flexible return to workplace program, but it allows us to ramp up in a manner that we believe is responsible and safe, and allows us to give our customers the level of comfort they're looking for as well. Next slide. On the technology and equipment side, one of the things that I believe, and that many of my counterparts around the country believe, will be part of this next normal, at least for the next 2-3 years, is the inclusion of digital meetings, the hybrid meetings, part in person, part virtually. part of our plan is to develop a process and the capital infrastructure needed to be able to provide that to our customers in a way that is affordable to them, that we can manage in a responsible manner. So that's a big part of what we're looking to do once we reopen. And we've also invested in a lot of other technologies that help us keep people safe and properly physically distanced. Next slide. We have a lot of smart communications folks on our team that will be assisting us in communicating this information along with our partners at the CVB. So the plans are there. The folks at the CVB have done a very good job of talking about those plans. There was a video that went out, I think, last week that really speaks to not just the convention center's ability and our plans, but also our hotel partners and retail partners and so on. So communicating what we're doing, both locally to our constituents and to our meeting planning partners and event attendees, is a critical part of this process as well. Next slide. And that's really it. It is a very robust plan designed to make sure that the convention center is ready to welcome folks back when they're ready to come back to the building. It is not designed to meet minimum requirements. One thing that I will suggest to you that I've bragged to many of my counterparts around the country is that our board of directors here and the authority under John's leadership has been very supportive and redirecting dollars to make sure that we can do those things that put us above the competition when that time comes. And I believe that we will be ready for our folks to return when they're ready to come back to live meetings.
Very cool. Thanks, Calvin. So I want to move to our third and final round, which really is the future, but I want to digress for a minute because Dr. Brandy, you said you were on the Spirit of Philadelphia. And even though technically we're not at Throwback Thursday, I think it's fair for me to share that when I was in college, I actually was a cook for H.A. Winston restaurants over on 15th and Locust and Front Street. So I don't know how many of you went to H.A. Winston. The Spivaks were amazing in terms of telling you never squash the burgers, but as a hard hospitality worker, I can certainly appreciate the challenges we're all having. And I know, John, I wanted to just get a couple of additional thoughts from you around our hotel community, because I know you're very much tied to it. And then I want to move into a quick discussion about a lot of the community outreach and community engagement programs that the Convention Center facilitates. And having worked with OIC for a number of years, the dedicated support of the Pennsylvania Convention Center for the hospitality training program over at OIC is nationally known. So let's just first talk about the hospitality workers side of things, and then if you could talk about the community outreach.
Well, as you know, Greg, we work very closely with GPHA and the CVB, GPHA, us, Visit Philly. We have sort of the five families of the hospitality world who come together frequently, and even more so frequently now, albeit virtual. We get together to talk about the challenges ahead, and we share a lot of data. We are very well served by Tourism Economics, which is an independent research and analysis firm, and they pull together for us statistics. And we're looking at some of them, and they don't look great, but there is some hope and there's some optimism around them. Right now, our hotel occupancy in 2020 is really projected to end up down around 45% from last year's levels. That's, it would be crushing in any business if there wasn't some scintilla of hope in the future. Revenue, of course, is significantly down, 90% of prior year levels at best. Overall, Center City room revenue is forecasted to be about 60% down in 2020 for the end of the year. That's pretty significant. The good news is that we do see some indications. So these projections, as we track them month to month, are pretty accurate, although we have been outperforming. Everybody touched some wood somewhere. Outperforming those projections slightly. So we've had a decent last couple of months. Hotel revenues come in above some of the more conservative estimates, which is good, which is positive. And we're hopeful that, the leisure market will power us out of this and we'll see some additional uptick in hotel stays. But unfortunately, we're not able at this point yet to really spike that and contribute through convention center activity. But we are holding, and Kelvin and his team are doing a great job at ASM to hold on to as many customers as possible. So we're still holding customers on the books right through the end of this calendar year, and into the Q1 of the next calendar year. So there's still business in the pipe that we could realize, and we will be prepared to realize it based on everything that Kelvin just gave you the overview on, and then some. So we're doing a lot in the building to make that happen. You want to re-ask me the next question?
Sure. I just wanted to have you quickly touch base on some of the community outreach and workforce work that the Convention Center has supported. And, once again, the work with the hospitality training program at OIC and the academies are, nationwide. They're considered a model of how a convention center can really have a positive impact. So if you could share some thoughts.
Yeah, we're really proud of that. Actually, that was baked in statutorily to one of the early iterations of our operating agreement with the Commonwealth, is that we would set aside, and this came from Congressman Evans and others who were very involved in the formative stages. Mayor Nutter was involved, Ed Rendell. But it really resulted in us making a commitment of about $1.5 million every year is a carve out from our hotel tax revenue that we receive, and we dedicate that towards 3 organizations: the Philly Academies, Mercy Career and Technical, 2 great organizations, and of course you already mentioned Philadelphia OIC, who we've had a very long-standing relationship with. And this goes back to something I talked about earlier, Greg, with Dr. Brandy. I mean, it's about the people, and this industry creates an enormous opportunity for people wherever they may find themselves, from whatever station they come from or wherever they exist. They have an opportunity to enter this industry and actually make, more than a job out of this. They can make a career out of this, and they can make a livelihood out of this, and they can feed their families, and they can do well and advance in life. So we are full-throated in our support for all 3 of those organizations. Our senior staff members are represented on all those boards, and we're very, very proud of the relationships in all those regards. And we have, in following the prideful reputation of PHL diversity, and the fact that, I don't know if it's the only anymore, but it was the first and certainly a pioneer in the DMO market to actually establish a dedicated diversity and inclusion and diverse component to the CVB. And the fact that we blazed that trail and the Convention Center in lockstep followed along, we have a very robust D&I program at the Convention Center Authority, and ASM is responsible for implementing that for us. But it includes the things like we've built vendor portals for WMDB businesses to be able to put their information in and be competitive in RFQs or RFPs or bid processes. We're constantly doing that outreach. We have a D&I officer who's a full-time person at a senior staff level here at the Convention Center, whose responsibility it is to make sure that not only are we giving those opportunities to women and minority-owned businesses to do business with the Convention Center, but we're also asking that they reach down and find minority subs and diverse subs to actually be also part of that project. So whatever advantage they'd received in life, that they're pulling somebody else up with them to be able to participate. So it's really part of our culture. It's something that we even tend to forget about because it's become so ingrained in how we do our business. But oftentimes people are surprised to realize that it is such an integrated portion of our spending program and our development program here at the authority. And my chief counsel, Shami Jones, who's an excellent attorney and a great person, also oversees sort of all of the compliance issues around that. And she's our conscience and our watchdog for all that work. And she does an amazing job for the authority.
Great. Dr. Brandy?
So I think, Kelvin, the last question that I have for you is, can you just discuss the impact that the center has on the hospitality workforce?
Sure. John was very eloquent earlier in talking about the Convention Center as an economic engine. And it is the same with the workforce. I believe the latest numbers suggest that regionally, there are roughly 192,000 hospitality-related jobs throughout the region, 76,000+ here in Philadelphia. And these are good jobs. These are not just low-wage jobs. These are jobs that allow people to take care of their families. John articulated earlier that these are often jobs that give people the opportunity to get in and move up and move up. And with the convention center, I do not lose sight of the fact that although our day-to-day job is to produce and manage events and deliver quality customer service, the result of that is the ability and the responsibility to keep those folks employed and to keep them gainfully employed. So the impact of our convention centers and others around the country is significant to the workforce, which makes this pandemic just that much more gut-wrenching and painful, because there's nothing more that I know John and others in our positions want to do than to get those folks back into the workforce.
Great. So I've been looking at the chat and it looks like it's been quite busy. So Ben, why don't we turn it over to you to launch a few questions from our audience?
I just lost all of the questions. Okay. Did we lose any annual large conventions meetings for 2021?
Yes. And shame on me for not having a list to talk about what those are, but I will speak broadly to the loss and the shift of business both this year and going into next year. There is a significant amount of uncertainty on the part of meeting planners, and more importantly on their customers, which are the attendees. That uncertainty, broadly speaking, is the unknown of a vaccine and being able to fly. So as I said earlier, this year, calendar 2020, major events, broadly speaking, have all canceled or rescheduled. Going into 2021, our team has weekly meetings, often multiple times weekly, with our CVB partners, looking at customers. We have a sort of a hot list of groups that are looking to move, those that have moved and where they are. So those conversations continue to happen on a daily basis. The objective is to make sure that we keep those folks on the books. And in some cases, because of the rotation of events, and that they may do an East Coast, Midwest, West Coast sort of rotation, they're not able to get back on the books here in Philadelphia for several years. But we have, like every other destination across the country, felt the impact in 2020 and early parts of 2021.
I think it's important to just dovetail on that very quickly. And we're going to keep seeing this until we have surety about what the end of this tunnel looks like on the timeline. It's very likely, because these are very logistics heavy operations. So they need to be dealing with their AV companies and their decorators and their general contractors 90, 120 and further days out to make a go, no-go decision. So we get it and we understand that. We made a business decision to try and preserve the relationship with those customers over trying to hold them arbitrarily under some contract language that at the end of the day was only going to be litigated and not likely to be successful either, and only cost a lot of money and lose a customer for life. So as Kelvin suggested, it's more important to us to preserve the relationship for the long term and have that sort of repeat business available to us in the future.
So we have another question that came through from Kelsey. How is the convention center working with event companies that are creating virtual events, if applicable? I'm not sure if this will be applicable in terms of your priorities.
Yeah, so the hybrid events, the digital event content is something many in our industry believe is going to be part of this next normal, at least for the next few years. We at the Pennsylvania Convention Center are taking steps through some of the redirecting of capital dollars to develop and dedicate rooms in the convention center that we're calling huddle rooms, That they are not as intricate and expensive as full-blown production studios, but we are developing and setting aside rooms that will allow customers to come into our building, plug in, cameras are there, the connectivity is there, everything they need is there to come in and film and broadcast parts of their event for those folks who cannot be in the facility directly. So we believe this is part of what's going to be required moving forward, and we are certainly preparing ourselves to be able to support that.
Awesome. So we have another question that came in from Latoya. What more can we as workforce providers do to contribute to the revival of the industry?
Wow. Anybody have a vaccine in your pocket? You know, John may be better equipped to answer this. I believe part of what we as general citizens can do is you know, speak to those who have the ability to impact those items on the medical side of the industry. You know, do what you're supposed to do, wear your mask, physically distance, all those things to help try to get us through this. There may be some political answers there that I don't know that I have all the insight to speak to, but I think the common sense things are the things that we can control.
Yeah, I think that, well, that's a great answer. I was on an upcoming NBC Live program. We taped it the other day, so I'll give you a sneak peek. I was asked the question of what can we do, what can Philadelphians do to help bring back the hospitality industry? And my best answer, the only answer I could think of on the spot, was just do the right thing. Be safe, be smart. We've been inundated. None of us are healthcare professionals on this panel. And there may be some on this session, but and so we don't pretend to give advice in that regard, but everyone's got to make personal choices and good health decisions around themselves. And there's been enough information out there now that we kind of know the basics, right? Philadelphia should be very proud, and the state of Pennsylvania actually should be very proud, because as you track the COVID related cases and numbers, Pennsylvania's doing pretty darn good, and Philadelphia is doing very well as well against other major urban centers. So given that performance, we should stay the course, and we should continue to do smart things to protect ourselves, our loved ones, particularly those at risk, and also other people. Now, that's not to suggest that we can't do that and also start to find ways to broaden the economic opportunities in the city and open business. I'm all for that. I just think smart people can come to terms and decide, how do we do that most safely? When asked the question of, you know, what do you expect as a traveler? What do you expect when you go to a city? What I expect is that those individuals will show the same measure of respect for my well-being as we're trying to do here for people who are going to be eventually our guests and attendees. And if we keep that as a baseline and they're just always cognizant of it, then I think we can do well. Philadelphia gets it. Philadelphia is a gritty city. It gets knocked on its butt once in a while, but it always dusts itself off, stands up, and fights back. And that's what we have to do. And so I think the answer to that is, for the workforce, the folks into the workforce, train them up. Maybe suggest to them opportunities might exist in, you know, the technology world around hospitality. Right, there's going to be a high demand on AV and even people who are technically capable of running these Zoom sessions and Microsoft Teams and Skype and whatever other format. We're going to need people in that space. So maybe that's somewhere you can direct the education and extended training for folks to enter this industry as productive participants.
Great. We have another question. So John asked, has the Philadelphia Auto Show rescheduled? Are there any specific larger scale events that are still on the books for 2021 that residents or tourists can still plan to attend, or is it a little bit too soon to forecast?
Yeah, I'll give it to Kelvin to talk about in more specifics. We can't talk, the auto show's still on. We're talking to them about some dates and space. I want to be very careful on this call not to predict what we're discussing with customers specific to their challenges or dates that they might be in. But I'm fairly optimistic that, you know, as Q1 of the next calendar year rolls in, which for us will be our third fiscal quarter, I do think we're going to start realizing some opportunities in business.
I would agree with that. I think that's the right answer, the responsible answer. Our 2021 calendar still have events. Some are looking to move around, but yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about things beginning to get back to some sense of consistency, later in 2021.
So, we have a couple minutes left, and John, there was one other program which the Pennsylvania Convention Center has really had a successful production of, the PHL Cares program that really supports our homeless community here in Philadelphia. Can you talk about that, just to also kind of expand some of the outreach work you've done in that area?
Sure. I'll even shamelessly plug the foundation that we established. Working with Pedro Ramos, our good friend at the Philadelphia Foundation, we established Philly Cares. It's a fund to help provide permanent supportive housing to homeless individuals. This came out of a problem/solution challenge that we had here at the convention center, where we had somewhere on the order of 50 to 75 homeless individuals who were sleeping in our 13th and 12th Street tunnels almost on a nightly basis. And it caused significant issues and problems, as you can imagine, not only with customers who didn't really understand it and didn't really care to understand it necessarily because they didn't have the time. They were only visiting briefly and seeing that the center was sort of inundated with homeless people. So we wanted to make sure that we were addressing the human element, the human component of that, and helping individuals, not just sweeping them out of our tunnels to go somewhere else, but instead get them into supportive housing, which shows that once you get a homeless individual, whether they're drug addicted or mentally unwell, whatever their situation might be, if they get into permanent supportive housing with the wraparound services, the recidivism rate for those individuals to go back to the street drops to less than 10%. It's extraordinarily effective. It also happens to be very expensive, right? So it costs about $15,000 a year to house and to support with necessary services those homeless individuals. But we didn't think it was insurmountable. We thought it was actually necessary to not only address the problem, but address it in a new and different way. So I formed the Philadelphia Philly Cares Foundation, just as serving as the mayor's chairman of the chronic homeless subcommittee. It just came out of our committee and we put it together. I pledged $500,000 as a challenge grant to the business community in Philadelphia. And we, to date, I think have about $1.2 million total in pledges and received funds. And I've actually been able to bake it into my budget for next year. So I'll be doing another $500,000 challenge grant. We are already, particularly during the COVID crisis, seeing that the most at-risk population, as you can imagine, are senior citizens living on the street. Many of them are mentally ill. Many of them have addictions, multiple addictions. And so we're targeting that most vulnerable population. And we've just last month, I believe, placed 7 or 8 new individuals in that category into permanent supportive housing. And the great news for them is that they are more than likely, if they accept service and they get there, they're more than likely, 9 out of 10 of those people will not return to the street. So it's something that actually kind of chokes you up when you think about it. But it's about making a difference. It's about all of Philadelphia. It's supported by groups like Wawa and PRE and PHL CBB and the hoteliers. We all saw a problem and we understood the business imperative that we needed to sort of clean up Philadelphia and clean the streets. But never forget, they're moms and dads and brothers and sisters. They're human beings that are on the street. So you had to look at the business imperative, also looking at the human imperative, which is we have a problem, but the problem is really somebody else's problem. It's a homeless individual, and that unfortunate soul has lost their way and they need some assistance. And it's not just going to happen magically. So that's where the business imperative and the human imperative can meet to actually solve the problem for both. So we're very proud of that and very proud of all the friends who have come to support that effort.
Well, John and Kelvin, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us this insightful understanding of the state of hospitality from the meeting and convention perspective. And of course, Dr. Brandy, amazing opportunity to share the stage with you. Look forward to joining once again. And after observing the chat, it looks like with all of those H.A. Winston and Company alumni out there that we should probably get a hold of Harry Spivak and do a Center City Proprietors look back at H.A. Winston and Company. So with that, it's been my pleasure to serve as a co-moderator for today's program, and we'll turn it over to you, Ben.